Hello. So you guys are going to be learning more about Reconstruction over the next couple of days. And so in order to do that, you are going to need your notebook, or you'll need some kind of lined paper. I don't know about you guys, but I actually left my notebook at school by accident. Oops. And so I'm having to use a different one right now. I will probably find out from you guys. I'll send out like a survey or something and find out if you still have your notebook at home, and I'll figure out some kind of way to do notebook checks. We'll figure it all out in time, right? Anyway, so you're going to need your notebook. I would recommend a ruler of some sort. I've actually had this same ruler since college, crazy enough. When I thought I was going to be an architect, that lasted about 2 days. Oops, bought supplies anyway. And then you're going to obviously want something to write with, some kind of pen or pencil. Now this video lecture, what I would recommend is that you spend some time on it today and you get done at least the first half, which would probably be all of page 22 front and back in your notebook. And you'll see that as you go through the slideshow. And then what I would recommend is that you do the second half, which would be page 23. I would recommend that once it shows you the setup for 23 that you pause it and you take a break and you revisit it tomorrow and finish up, because this is a 2-day plan. I decided not to put it into Edpuzzle, and you'll see why in just a moment. So, the story of Reconstruction, there are 4 different plans. Officially, people say that there's 3. But I think there's something else that's significant enough that it deserves to be called a 4th plan. So anyway, okay, so a few announcements I wanted to make sure to tell you about. First off, there's Honeypot, asleep with the little bone in her mouth. We've had some trouble getting her some decent sized bones, so she's been chewing on my little Chihuahua's bones, which is not great. Anywho, so we have office hours. I will be holding live office hours on Thursdays. So just like when I used to hold study tables at school, but it'll be from 2 to 3 p.m. And what I'll do is it'll either be a Zoom or it'll be a Google Meet or something like that. And I'll put the link into Google Classroom just a few minutes before we're set to start, okay? And all you have to do is join. If you have any questions on assignments, if you want to go over anything in person, you just have a quick question you want to pop in, you want to say hello, whatever. I'd love to see you there, okay? 2 to 3 on Thursdays is going to be it. And then another thing I wanted to tell you is that while you have this video lecture that you need to take notes on Wednesday and on Thursday you're also going to have a brand new Flipgrid post that you will make. And so there'll be a new question posted for you, and you go ahead and you post your answer on Flipgrid. Thanks so much to those of you who have already been engaged in Flipgrid. It's awesome. I love it. So right here, what you can see is they're not even due yet. They're actually due this evening. I think I posted it like at 11:59 or something like that. And it shows that out of all 5 of my classes, it's 16 hours and 44 minutes worth of video in here, which is so cool. And I loved watching some of these earlier today. I can't wait to take a look at the rest of them. And I also noticed a lot of you guys reviewing each other's, which was really cool too. So anyway, and then we will be on the next day, we will be having a discussion on Flipgrid. So we'll be going back to those video posts that our fellow students made, and we will be discussing and making some comments, and I'll post that follow-up for you as to how that should go. Alrighty? And then also on Friday, we will have an open note quiz. So the notes that you take from this video lecture are absolutely essential. You'll need to make sure to do that, because I do not plan to post the slideshow for you. Sorry. But you can pause this video as much as you need to get what you need. Alright? Another thing is, now, a lot of students have joined me on Remind. I don't actually have my phone down here. Oops, whatever. But these are the codes. If you still need to join Remind, I recommend that you do so. I'm not going to send out a ton of announcements through it. I used to use this a lot over the past few years, and then I thought this year, let's take a break. I'm sending too many things out and whatever. Wanted to give you guys more personal space. But now that we're in the situation we're in, this is honestly the easiest way to get a hold of me. And if you have something that's like a quick question you just want the answer to real quick while you're working on an assignment, you can text me privately, okay? And that's how this works. Your replies to an announcement you don't have to be afraid that other students are going to see what you say, because they won't. Alrighty? So anyway, there's the codes for you. If you need something right away, please join up. So setting up your notebook page. So for page 22, you need to go ahead and set it up. So I recommend that you pause the video and you go ahead and take a look and zoom in if you need to. But I'll go over it with you real quick. So we have page 22. The Story of Reconstruction is the title of it. So Reconstruction is, and we will go over the definition together, just so you have a clear definition on what this era was all about. And then I want you to spend a couple of minutes on your thinking on a plan for it. Now, I know you did a little bit of this on your Flipgrid, but maybe you watched a couple of other students' answers and you're like, oh, that was a really great idea. Maybe I should think on that too. Please go ahead and jot down some ideas that you have. You can also revisit the Flipgrid and go back and see what other students had to say, and you can borrow ideas if you wish. It's totally fine. Then down here, we have a timeline of events. Now you're going to see a slide that shows you these different dates. And if you notice, they go from here, January of 1863, to January of 1865. See the cute little arrow? Then you've got May through December 1865. And then it goes down here to December 1865 through 1877. Oh, that's a long one. And then over here, so sorry, this was terrible. I made a little mistake and I don't have any whiteout, so I had to squeeze it in. It is actually March 1869 to March 1877. And then the final date here is March 1877. So this is the time period that Reconstruction went on, was from 1863 to 1877. All right, so get your page set up, get ready to go. Take your ruler out, use it if you need it to draw those fun little lines down here, if you wish, for the timeline part. Okay, so, oops, yeah, let me not do that. Reconstruction, what is it anyway? So Reconstruction is the era that came directly after the Civil War, because there's this whole question of, okay, so there were these 11 states that seceded from the United States, and they were rebelling against the United States, and they caused this huge war and all of these deaths. So what exactly should we do to allow these states to rejoin the United States? What are they going to have to do to kind of show that they're really in it now and that they want to be a part of things and they're not going to cause problems again? So anyway, it's the era that comes directly after the Civil War. As I mentioned before, it's from 1865 to 1877. Okay, so the Jim Crow era goes on beyond this, and Jim Crow is a term that we'll talk about probably next week, but it was started from a vaudeville show, which was like a play. Basically, people used to go to these shows that were like live entertainment, and Jim Crow was a character that was made up that was supposed to make fun of black people, and it was supposed to show them in very stereotypical ways. And so the Jim Crow era came after Reconstruction was ending, basically, and it went on through a long, long period of segregation that went on through until the early 1960s, which is crazy, right? 100 years later, and people still haven't figured things out. So, several plans were enacted to attempt to reunite the southern states with the Union. And in some plans, not all of them, the goal was to establish equal rights and better living conditions for newly freed men, so former slaves. So that's what Reconstruction is. There were 4 different plans. Some people say 3. I'm going to say 4. So here's your timeline of events. Okay, so I'm going to briefly walk you through this. You can pause it if you need to get down what you need for each of these. Now keep in mind that everything in this lecture is definitely quizzable, and you will want to have this information in your notes so you can easily flip to it and go, what's the answer to such and such? Oh, it's right there. Okay, so anyway, January of 1863. So we know that the Emancipation Proclamation was issued for a second time on January 1st, 1863, but Lincoln is also starting to think about the conclusion of the war. Always thinking ahead, right? Smart guy. And he's thinking, we need to have a plan in place for allowing these states to come back into the Union. So what's it going to be? So Lincoln begins to piece together his plan for allowing southern states to rejoin. But as you guys know, he was assassinated on April 14th of 1865, so his plan did not go forward, and he only had created a small part of it. January of 1865, that is when Sherman, this is towards the end of the war, right? Just a few months later, April, okay? That's when the surrender happens from Robert E. Lee, and then a little later on, you've got, I believe it's Beauregard that surrenders to Sherman down further in the Deep South. But anyway, so Sherman, that general who was like the sidekick to Grant, he decides that newly freed slaves in South Carolina should receive some land. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then May through December in 1865, Andrew Johnson, who has become the president right after Lincoln's assassination. So Andrew Johnson was his vice president. He puts his lenient plan into place. And then by December, he's like, mission accomplished. We're all done. Isn't that great? No, it actually was terrible. And then December of 1865 to 1877, that is when Congress said, oh no, Andrew Johnson, your plan sucks. So we're going to fix it, and then we're going to impeach you because you did something illegal. Anywho, all right? So the radical Republicans who control Congress, they put in a stronger, more fair plan. And then from 1869 to 1877, Ulysses S. Grant was actually president for 2 terms, and he was inaugurated. And then in 1877, this is when Reconstruction comes to a close. The North is basically sick of dealing with Reconstruction at this point, and so Rutherford B. Hayes, when he gets into office, he's elected president. That's when Reconstruction is officially over, which isn't great. It leaves a lot of African Americans in the lurch to be terrorized further by groups like the Ku Klux Klan. So I'll go ahead and set up the back of your notebook page. So what you'll see on here, so this is the back of page 22, like so. And you have plan number 1, Lincoln's plan. So I've got a couple of key terms that I'm going to go over with you guys that you will want to know throughout this unit. And then you're going to want to know some of the details of Lincoln's plan, which you'll put over here. You can paraphrase things, whatever you need to do. And then over here, it says the reality. I apologize about my handwriting. So sorry. Okay. And then we've got plan number 2. Plan number 2 is Sherman's plan. Actually, this plan really makes me like Sherman a lot. I'm not going to lie. So he did some stuff later on that was just atrocious out west, but we're not going to go into that right now. But this plan makes me like him a little better. So key terms, okay? So again, I'm going to have a few key terms for you that relate to Sherman's plan. And then you've got the details and you've got the reality, okay? Now, if you guys need additional space, yes, you can create like a 22B or something like that. Don't worry about trying to squeeze everything in onto one page. It's okay. If you need another overflow page, then take it and just call it 22B, okay? All right, so here we go. So number 1, plan number 1 is Lincoln's plan. It was unfinished, okay? And a lot of people wonder, well, what if he had lived? What if he had been able to see it through? What would have happened? Okay, yeah, would have been nice. So, some key terms. You need to take both of these down, please. Okay, both of these are concerning Lincoln's plan. So, an oath. An oath is like a promise, okay? It's a pledge. Oftentimes, there will be an oath of office that's taken by a president, which is what you see Lyndon B. Johnson doing down in this picture. Lyndon B. Johnson actually took the oath of office in a plane. I forget where exactly he was at. I don't think he was in Texas. I don't remember. But this was after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. His vice president took the oath of office, and he promised to uphold the presidency and protect the country and all that stuff, okay? So that's what an oath is. 10%, you know what 10% is, okay? It's a fraction, you know, it's 1/10. Okay, all that. It's a relatively small percentage though, right? I mean, if someone says, hey, I'm going to give you 1/10 of a pizza, you're probably like, oh, great, that's a good snack. Thanks so much. All right? All right, so anyway, those 2 terms concern Lincoln's plan. So with Lincoln's plan, here's the details. So this goes in your details section right here. So again, if you need to expand a little bit, it's okay. I get it. So Lincoln came up with part of it in 1863 when he starts to think ahead like, oh, gee, you know, this war, looks like we might actually win, you know, all that stuff. Okay. So his plan consists of something called the 10% plan. Okay. And his thought was, if he could get 10% of white male voters, because all voters were male at that time, okay? Women's suffrage doesn't happen until like 1920, believe it or not. Whoa, okay, anywho. So if 10% of white male voters who were registered back in 1860 before secession occurred, before these different states were leaving, if 10% from each of those states came forward and signed an oath of loyalty to the Union, where they're saying, I promise I'm not going to do anything bad again. I'm not going to try to be like some rogue member of the Confederate States of America or wage guerrilla warfare on the United States, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Anywho, the idea was that the state could then start a pathway to rejoining the Union and becoming a state again, because you want to be an official state again. You want to have it where the military is no longer occupying you by force, right, to make you do things. That would be nice. You also want to have representation in Congress again so that you have a say, right? So anyway, this was the idea, is that maybe if 10% of white male voters came forward from the South and they signed this loyalty pledge, like let's say if 10% of voters in Georgia, if they said, fine, we'll sign this oath of loyalty to the Union, then we will go ahead and start this whole process. Georgia will start the process towards statehood. Okay? Problem is, plan was never finished. Okay? Lincoln was assassinated. We have no idea of the other details. I mean, we can all speculate, but you know, this is the part that we know most about. The reality is that Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, had other ideas. He didn't like the 10% plan. So that was basically dead in the water. That's over. Okay, so the bottom line is many people wonder what Lincoln would have done. You know, he is still thought of as America's one of the best presidents that's ever been in the United States. Okay, it's a pity that he was assassinated. So he did a lot of good. So, moving on. Plan number 2. Okay, so now you are down here where it says, well, you are on the back of 22, yes? And where it says Sherman's plan, that's where this is going to go. So this is a good idea, but Sherman can't take all the credit for this. I mean, we give credit to him because he's the one who wrote the official order, but it actually wasn't his idea. But President Johnson decides he doesn't like this idea anyway, so he gets rid of it in a little while. But for a few months anyway, there was like this ray of shining hope, okay? Where everyone was like, wow, this is so cool. So the key terms you need to know here. You need to know about what an acre is. So I tried to give you some perspective on this. An acre is 43,560 square feet. And if you can't quite visualize that, you can think, okay, in a square mile, there are 640 acres in there. And then if you're still like, what? I mean, how big is just one? How big is 1 acre? Okay, so if you think back to when we were all at Dunston, and if you looked across the street from Dunston and you saw those brick homes over there, each of those brick homes was on about, or is on about, 1/4 to 1/3 of an acre. Okay? Now, most houses today are built on a plot of land that's like 0.18 acres, so like little tiny, okay? But anyway, that's if you don't like yard work, then that works for you, right? But anyway, if you want a nice big yard. Okay, so 1/3 of an acre, or 1/4 an acre is what you're looking at in those brick houses across the street from Dunston. Give you perspective. A mule. Okay, a mule is a fine working animal, okay? So they're widely used on farms and that kind of thing. They were used on plantations. So the mule, you get a mule when you take a male donkey and you take a female horse. And I'm not going to go into the details here. I'm sure you can imagine. Boom! All of a sudden, you get a working animal, okay? All right, that's the offspring. Yay. Freedmen's Bureau. Freedmen's Bureau was something that was established in March of 1865. Its role changed over time. But one of its jobs was to oversee the distribution of land to newly freed slaves. And you're like, wait, how'd they get land? You're going to see in just a second. Okay? Keep in mind, you can pause if you need to. I'm moving on. So, the ins and outs of this plan. Okay, so here's Sherman up in the top, looking somewhat frumpy, whatever. Okay, and then here we are looking at the southeastern United States. We got South Carolina right here wedged in, and then we've got this little edge of Georgia. Georgia goes on a little further, okay? And then we got Florida right here, okay? So, what happened was Sherman and the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, all right? You'll hear his name again later. They met up in Savannah with 20 black leaders. So most of these leaders that they met up with were actually ministers. And so this is after Sherman has gone on his frenzy, right? And he did his march to the sea, and Atlanta is like a distant memory of ashes, you know, in the background. And so they reached Savannah, and Sherman had sent his little telegram saying, hey, Lincoln, Merry Christmas. Here's Savannah, I present it to you. Whatever. Okay, so Sherman and Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War, they get together with these leaders of the black community, and they ask them, they said, so hey, what would you guys want? What do you want out of this? Okay, and meanwhile, keep in mind that as Sherman is going and ravaging Georgia and burning things down and stealing stuff and all kinds of stuff, there's a lot of newly freed men and women, I presume, who are following him and his soldiers. So he's got like this, he's almost like the Pied Piper or something. He's got these people who are following him. He's got these refugees now. You know, they're basically refugees, and they're like, well, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? So he says to the black leaders, what can we do? And they said, what you should do is you should give us land. That is what we want. And he's like, oh, well, that makes sense. So then 4 days later, after he meets with them, on January 16th, 1865, he creates Order Number 15. And what Order Number 15 is he says, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece of coastline that goes all the way down from Charleston in South Carolina. Remember, Charleston's like the bad epicenter, right, of the Civil War. That's where things start, you know, and that's where Fort Sumter was and all that stuff. Okay? Anywho. So go from Charleston, South Carolina, all the way down to St. John's River in Florida. Now, I believe St. John's River is in the northern part of Florida, but don't quote me on that, okay? I should have looked it up. I didn't. Oops. Okay, but, so it's going to be that stretch of coastline, and it's going to be 30 miles wide out from the coast. So it's going to go right along here, along the coastline, and then just 30 miles in. So not that far in, okay? Anyway. So, here's the thing. Only black people may live there. Okay? And each family can claim up to 40 acres. So they can get a 40-acre plot so that they can start their own farm. They can do their own stuff. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? To give people a chance to say, hey, these people, these plantation owners, they started this war, they treated you terribly, they enslaved you. Now you're going to get to have some land of your own to farm. So, they call it 40 acres and a mule, okay? 40 acres and a mule is the common phrase that's used around this Order Number 15, okay? Apparently Spike Lee's movie company is also named 40 Acres and a Mule after this idea. But the mules were not part of the original order. They came as a later order, and they were loaned out by the U.S. Army to say, hey, you might need a mule to help you work the land. Okay, makes sense, right? The Freedmen's Bureau, their job was to, oops, I spelled it wrong. Oh, that's terrible. The Freedmen's Bureau, their job is to distribute the land and make sure that these families get their parcel of up to 40 acres. And that starts in March of 1865, and that inspires all this hope, and people are like, wow, this is amazing, you know? So you have a lot of African Americans who flock to this area, and they're saying, great, finally, we're going to be treated right, okay? So, President Andrew Johnson, though, when he becomes president, he doesn't like this very much. He doesn't like this, and so what he does is he takes away this order number 15. And he gives a lot of, I don't know what his problem was. He decided to give the land back to the original owners in September of 1865. So all of these people who had gone there, oh my gosh, I mean, I can't even imagine. Let me just tell you how many people there were. Where is it? It's in my notes. I took notes on it today. Oh my gosh. Oh, this is it. Okay, so by June of 1865, now March of 1865 is when it gets started, right? Kickstarts, all right? By June, 40,000 freedmen were settled on 400,000 acres of what was called Sherman's land. 40,000 flocked there, and they said, whoa, let's take this. So this little moon-shaped area right in here, okay? That's where people flocked to get some land. It was a really radical idea, by the way. The bottom line is giving land to someone to repair for harm. It's a great idea, right? But it's something that throughout time has never really worked very well, unfortunately. And in this case, we never really got to see this fully play out to see if it would have worked. It sounded like a great idea, right? Take the land away from the aggressors and give it to those who are so deserving of it. However, if you think of a more modern example, after World War II, you had the Allies decide to create a homeland of Israel, right? They created the homeland of Israel, which was carved out of Palestine, and many Jews had already started emigrating there. Okay, or they had started emigrating from parts of Europe to Israel. Okay, it was called the Zionist movement. So they decided to declare that a country. But as we know, there is still all kinds of massive conflict in the Middle East, and a lot of it has to do with the Palestinians not really having a home of their own as a result. So good intentions, right? But anyway, it was a really radical idea. But this idea of 40 acres and a mule is, just think about what should be done to repair the harm from slavery. Okay, what reparations could be made? It's something to think about. I mean, how do you recognize the pain and the suffering that people have been through? It's a huge question. I'm going to shut up now and move on. Okay, so anyway, see this little orange piece right here? This is thought to be the area that fell underneath order number 15, 40 acres and a mule. Okay, and just think about how would things be different today if this policy really had stuck around. So you can see it's from South Carolina, Charleston, through Georgia, okay, Georgia coastline, plus the islands off of Georgia. There's a bunch of islands off of there. I've been to one of them. I didn't like it so much. Got bitten by an ant. Anywho, moving on. So here is where I would pause the video. You have done enough for today. But if you really want to and you want to get it all over with, you want to keep going, there's not that much left. But anyway, it is up to you. Okay, keep in mind you'll also have a flip grid on Thursday. Alrighty? So anyway, if you want to set up your page, please go ahead and do so. Similar setup to the last two plans. So now we have Story of Reconstruction continued on page 23. And then you've got number 3, plan number 3 is Johnson's plan. Andrew Johnson. And then key terms. So I've got a few key terms for you. We have the details over here, which you'd fill in. Okay, so the details of his plan. And then you got the reality of how it actually went. Then the 4th plan is the radical, they were called radical Republicans. And many of their ideas were really progressive. I mean, look at them and like, wow, that's, yeah, okay. All right, so radical Republicans' plans. So they really wanted to create more of a system of equality. It's interesting. Key terms, again, and then you've got the details, and then you got the reality. Okay? Now, if you need more space, which you will, just spill onto the back of that page. Okay? You can add, you can add some additional notes and some few extra facts from the end on the back. Okay? So it says, continue on back. Alrighty. Here we go. Johnson's plan. Not so great. That's an understatement. 2 key terms that you need to know about. One are the black codes, okay? Black codes were laws that were put into place by southern states, and they were designed to limit the freedoms of former slaves. So slaves were free, and there's one historian in particular, his last name is Gates, and he says in a documentary that he made, it's amazing, it's on PBS, watch it, that's about Reconstruction. I think his name is Henry Louis Gates, or it's Louis Henry Gates Jr., I don't remember which, but Gates, okay? He said that after the Civil War, it was as though the slaves stepped forward into the light of freedom, and then under Reconstruction, they fell back into the shadows. I thought that was a pretty powerful analogy. Okay, so black codes, some shadows there, okay? Like, for example, if you were unemployed and you didn't have a job, then you could be picked up and you could be forced to work, imprisoned to work. Oh, gee, that sounds like slavery, right? Okay. Impeachment. You know this one. We studied impeachment. You know that the House is the one that draws up the articles of impeachment, which are the accusations. Each article is a different accusation, okay? And then they vote on them to say, do we think these stick? Do they fit? And if they're like, yes, we have enough evidence, let's take this to the Senate where let's have a trial, and then let's decide if this government official is going to be removed or not. Okay? So removal happens in the Senate. Now, how many presidents has this ever happened to? 0. All right? So anyway, Andrew Johnson. So he starts up after Lincoln is dead. Lincoln has been assassinated. So he starts in May of 1865. And what he decides to do is he says, okay, what we'll do is we'll pardon all the white Southerners. We'll just pardon them. We'll say, oh, it's okay. It's okay. We forgive you. All right. Except, an interesting guy. I mean, he kind of had a little chip on his shoulder because I think he'd grown up poor, you know? And he was like, except for those rich guys. I want those rich guys to come see me in person, and they're going to have to grovel, and they're going to have to beg, and then I'll pardon them. Isn't that nice? Anywho, so wealthy plantation owners and former leaders of the Confederacy were forced to come and meet with him in person and beg him for forgiveness, and then he would pardon them. Okay, he took back all the land that had been given to African Americans under Sherman's Order Number 15. He's like, nah, that's not going to happen. And they gave it back to the white people. And then he appointed governors in the South. And so he just appointed these people who used to be in power, some of them, and just said, hey, you're a nice dude. I think we'll put you in there. We'll put you in there. We'll put you in there. We'll put you. So these people probably still supported the South, right? And values of this is not a way to get things off to the right foot. This doesn't work well. This is like, hey, let's just imagine like the Civil War never happened. Let's reverse the clock and let's go back to the way things were. So in order to get statehood back, he said there were 3 things they had to do. 1, each state had to cancel their little papers they'd written up on secession. We secede from the United. They had to tear those up, okay, and nullify them and say, oh, those are not real anymore. They had to ratify the 13th Amendment. Now, the 13th Amendment, we'll talk more about that next week, but the 13th Amendment is what made the Emancipation Proclamation stick, okay? So it made all slaves free throughout the United States. Legit, it's part of the Constitution, very hard to take that back, okay? As we know with executive orders, any president can write one, and it stays for a while. Supreme Court might say, oh, no, you can't do that. And Congress might try to say, oh, no, you can't do that. But probably it sticks around until the next guy gets in office, and then he's like, no, I don't like that. Throw it out, okay? By making it an amendment, it sticks in the Constitution. That's it. So, and the third thing is they had to give up on reclaiming any debts that they felt they were owed. I don't know. I'm not going to explain that too much, okay? But if they felt like, oh, you messed up my towns, you messed up my city, you owe me money. No, not going to happen, okay? So just even Steven, no IOUs, done, whatever. Okay, it's more complicated than that, but whatever. So the reality is that Andrew Johnson did his Reconstruction plan all on his own. Pretty much. I mean, he had the cabinet, but he didn't really like them too much. He didn't really listen to them too much. And later on, he tried to fire one of them. He tried to fire Edwin Stanton, who is the Secretary of War throughout the Civil War under Lincoln. He's the one who helped Sherman listen to the black community about what do you want, you know, in Savannah. And that's when the 40 acres and a mule policy comes up, all that stuff. So what Johnson did is, one, Congress, okay, let me back up. Congress was on an 8-month break. So Johnson says, here's my plan. It's going to be this, 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 and this. And then we're done. Yay! We're done by December. Okay? Congress gets back into session later on, and they're like, no, mission was not accomplished. We don't think so. This is bad. And so Congress comes back in December of 1865. They vote to limit his power, and they override his vetoes, which that's kind of rare. You know, when a president vetoes something, usually it's really hard to go back and get that majority that you need in order to pass the legislation without him. But they did it. And how they limited his power is they said, hey, you are no longer allowed to just randomly appoint people or to randomly fire people. You have to put it through us, and then we'll approve whether we agree with your appointment or the person that you've chosen for such and such cabinet position, or the person that you're wanting to fire. We have to okay that too. So what Johnson did is he fired Stanton after this limit was put on his power, and Congress said, oh no, you don't. And what they did is they then decided to impeach Johnson. So the House drew up the articles of impeachment. They went to the Senate. They have the trial. Andrew Johnson almost got impeached. It was 1 vote short in the Senate. He's known as one of America's worst presidents, by the way. Okay, going from best to the worst. Now, plan number 4, Radical Republicans plan. It's progress. Yay! They really did try. Okay, they tried to do some things, but anyway, some progress was made. Okay, so here's your key terms. Carpetbagger. So carpetbaggers were Northerners who were generally wealthy, okay? Most of them had good intentions, but they headed down to the South to try to rebuild the economy, to try to help out, you know? But the Southerners saw these people very negatively, and they said, oh, those carpetbaggers, oh, those terrible Northerners coming to take all our money and whatever. Okay, so that was a lot of tension, by the way, you know, Northerner, Southerner, it was a big deal. Scalawags. So you had some people in the South who were like, you know, maybe Republicans aren't all that bad. Maybe it kind of benefits me economically if I go along with what they're trying to do, so maybe I should support the Republican Party. So Southerners called them scalawags, which is supposed to be a demeaning term. Okay, and those people were seen as traitors to the South. Now, sharecropping. Sharecropping is what emerges when Order Number 15 is taken away, because you have all these African Americans now, and then you've still got all these plantations and all this land that these white people still control, but they cannot enslave these people and force them to work their land. So what they do is they loan their former slaves a portion of the land to work and to plant their own crops and harvest them and that kind of stuff. Here's the crappy thing about sharecropping, though. It sounds like, is that okay? No. One, you're basically working for your former master in many cases. Awful, right? 2, you have to give up half of your harvest as payment. Half. And where do you think the seeds are coming from? And where do you think the tools are coming from? So basically what the former owners did, these old masters, is they said, hey, I got these tools for you. Go ahead and you can have them. You can buy them from me, but it's going to cost you, and then I'm going to charge you interest because I know you can't pay for them. So people were constantly in debt. It's a ridiculous cycle, okay, where people were controlled. It's just awful, okay? And that's what Gates was saying about stepping backward into the shadows. Systems like sharecropping definitely did that. So here's some of the ins and outs of this plan, okay? So there are 3 goals, and these goals are really good. 1 is these radical Republicans. They want to guarantee civil and political rights for African Americans. okay? They want them to be able to participate in society and to have equality. Wow, okay? That's a big deal. They also want to change the Southern economy so that it benefits everybody. So it doesn't just benefit these white, wealthy plantation owners. They want to spread it out so that other people can also benefit. And then they wanted to expand public services. Now this is interesting because before this time, there were not really public schools throughout the South. I forget what percentage it is. I don't think I wrote it down, but it was very low of people in the South who, and you know, white people, because black people were not allowed to be literate, right? Because that's dangerous. So anyway, I don't remember. But public schools are created as a public service, which is amazing, right? So public schools are created throughout the South and then also in the North too. The enrollment in one state. So this is in the state of South Carolina. I should have put South Carolina. Oops. Keep that in mind. This is not throughout the entire South. In South Carolina, it goes from 30,000 students in 1868 when it first gets started to 123,000 by 1876. That is huge. And that means that white children, African American children, they are all allowed to go to school. But there's a catch. You'll hear about that in a second. Then there were also some new laws that they put into place to actually provide medical care to people who couldn't afford it. And then also to try to give women the right to own land. Wow! And then they also said that interracial marriage should be allowed. Okay, so this is progress. This is moving forward. So here's the reality though. Tensions were really high between Northerners who were seen as taking advantage of what was going on there, coming down and trying to get rich quick, and Southerners who were, you know, they lost and they're feeling all down on things, and they don't like, the white Southerners don't like this change in their society. White supremacy, you know, that starts up. All of that. So there were also tensions, of course, between blacks and whites, because there's this whole thing of, well, wait a second. If they are now free, and then there's these poor white people who also don't own land, but they want a piece of things too. And then, of course, there's the former plantation owners that are going, oh, wait a second, now we have to pay people to work for us? What? We have to loan out our land? What's this? So a lot of discontent. So sharecropping becomes the norm in the South. We talked about that term, okay? And it results in that terrible cycle of debt. And it's like being back in slavery in some ways, okay? So, and you might wonder, well, why don't people move? Why don't they leave? Some people did leave. They were called exodusters, okay? And those people left to go to Kansas. Many African Americans decided, if they could afford to, if they could get out of there, they said, we're packing up and we're going to Kansas, and we're going to try to take advantage of things there and have a better life for ourselves. Things were not all rosy in Kansas either, okay? But that's another story. So anyway, down here we've got a schoolhouse with African American children in front, okay? So this was a major development, being able to go to school. I mean, there were some African Americans who were as old as 90 who wanted to learn how to read and write, and they also decided, I want to go to school too. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Education is a good opportunity. Excuse me. All right, so anyway, here's a picture of sharecropping. Okay, and sharecropping went on for a long time. It's not as though it was only during that period of Reconstruction. It was a system that went on after that. So I just want you guys to think about, as you look at this picture, here's cotton fields, okay, and here's people picking the cotton. How did a lack of land ownership by black people have a lasting impact in the South? Think about that. If they don't own land and they don't have the opportunity to own land, some did, but they were also terrorized oftentimes because they were landowners, because white people were jealous and white supremacy and all of that, okay? There's some stories out there. But how did that lack of land ownership have an impact? All right, a few more ins and outs. Yeah, you're gonna have to go on the back of the page, so sorry. You know, so you're now probably on the back of 23 for sure. Just continue that chart, you know, of details. and the reality, okay? So the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, they expand the rights of African Americans. Southern states had to write new constitutions that included rights for African Americans, for black people, okay? States had to approve the 14th Amendment, which we will talk more about next week, okay? So 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are all about giving African Americans more rights, citizenship, you know, and the actual privileges that go along with it, and voting, you know, being able to vote and having that right to vote be protected. So that's what 13th, 14th, 15th are about in a nutshell, all right? Former Confederate officials from the CSA were not allowed to be part of government. It makes sense, right? Why would you want someone who committed treason against the United States to then be allowed to be a senator? Does that make any sense? Not really. So the reality, for the first time in American history, you have multiracial governments emerge, which is amazing, right? But many white people refuse to recognize these new governments. So they do this through passive means, passive meaning that they decide, oh, fine, you know, if black people are going to be allowed to be my legislator, then I'm not going to vote. I'm out. Okay? Or they had aggressive means of going through it, and that's like through groups like the Ku Klux Klan that burned crosses and lynched people. And I mean, okay, so let me take you back here for a sec. I didn't explain this picture at all. Now what this is showing is a lynching, all right? So I don't exactly get the symbolism of why KKK is the mule. I don't know. Maybe it's because mules were workhorses in getting things done. I don't know. It's a pretty sick little cartoon here. And then you've got these two people here who have been lynched. One of them presumably might be an African American person. The other is a carpetbagger from Ohio. Okay? So the KKK and other white supremacist groups, they weren't the only one, they launched all of these efforts to terrorize people, to prevent them from trying to own their own land, to prevent them from trying to get an education, to prevent them from voting. That was a huge deal, like to try to keep them from going to the polls, to intimidate them. And oftentimes the lynchings would be very public. There are all kinds of photographs of these people who have just hanged somebody and tortured them publicly. They've hanged them from a tree, usually. And then there's all these people gathered around and they take a group photo or something. It's like, hey, selfie time. What? I mean, it's incredible that this kind of stuff was going on. And this was going on through the 1950s and perhaps even the early 1960s. I mean, it's insane, okay? Lynching's a topic that you guys can investigate next week if you are inclined. Okay, so here's the deal. We've got intimidation and lynchings done to stop African Americans from voting and other things as well. Then we've got the system of segregation that really gets going. And that's where it's mostly white people who want to keep things separate from African Americans. So that's in the case of schools, that's in the case of transportation, and that's also in the cases of accommodations like places to live or stay. Now here's the thing though. When it came to segregation, some African Americans thought that rather than expose their children to a potentially racist white teacher, they said, you know what? We would rather have our children go to an all-black school, and we would rather have them taught by a black teacher than from some white person who might treat them very poorly, and from having white peers who also might treat them poorly. So that's the case. That's the reason why there were a lot of black students who decided to, self-segregate, I suppose. But segregation as a system became entrenched after Plessy versus Ferguson, which was a major Supreme Court case. It established separate but equal. It's awful because it was never equal, okay? Anywho, moving on. There was some corruption in Grant's government, okay, in President Grant. There were a couple of different scandals that went on that you guys will have the potential to investigate if you wish. The bottom line with the radical Republicans is that their goals are really good, but the enforcement wasn't all there. And if there weren't troops to back it up, and if there weren't people at the polls saying, hey, we are going to allow you to cast your vote freely without fear of intimidation, and to follow up on white people who are terrorizing these African Americans, if there's not that support and that enforcement, then it wasn't going to work. And so white supremacists, really, they worked hard to terrorize black people so that they could silence them. And in the end, by 1877, with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, the North gets tired of it and they say, you know what, we're done. Okay, we don't want to deal with this anymore, this problem. Okay, so moving on. Here's a major accomplishment, though, that happened as a result of Reconstruction. Okay, and this is mainly during that time of the Radical Republicans' plan, which went on for quite a while. But what happened was you had 2 African Americans who became United States senators. 2. I mean, but in the United States Senate. Then you've got 14 African Americans serving in the United States House of Representatives. That's a major accomplishment, right? 600 African Americans served in state legislatures. So that's pretty amazing. And in that Ed puzzle you guys did the other day, you heard a few names. You heard about Robert Smalls. You heard about John Roy Lynch. It also talked about Hiram Revels a little bit, and there were others as well. So that was a major accomplishment. Now here's a visual of the plans, okay, of the 4 Reconstruction plans. So you've got Lincoln's 10% plan first. Then you've got Sherman's 40 acres and a mule. Okay, so that goes in January 1865. It lasts for a little while, a few months, until Johnson decides, oh, let's just pardon all those white Southerners and let them off the hook and let them have their land back. And, status quo, yuck. And then you've got the Radical Republicans who had those 3 major goals, right, to improve the South. And that went on until 1877. Okay? So, now if you have any questions, I encourage you to join me for office hours. That will be on Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. I'll put the link into Google Classroom before we're scheduled to start. And that's it, guys. I mean, thank you for listening, and I hope that it was helpful to help you understand these different plans of Reconstruction. I want you to think about, what are the parts that you're like, yeah, that seems to make sense, or what would you have changed, or what do you think Lincoln's plan might have been if he had lived, and all those sorts of things. What difference does land ownership make? All of those things I want you to be mulling over for when you go and you do your Flipgrid question in just a little bit. Alrighty. Have a good one.